This is my second posting on YouTube about demand curve strategies in marketing. The first one I talked about your stated usual brand and what happens when you start varying the price when you ask that question. In this one I want to talk about brand aversion. It is a very, very important part of your demand curve strategies. The main reason why I don't buy brands I don't like is quite simple. Why should I? In the modern retail environment, it is seldom necessary to buy a brand that I don't like. We have fantastic distribution, fantastic choice in the third world. Well, there are exceptions. I had a friend who worked for a cigarette company and they insisted that he smoked their brands. I remember that he still slipped away and had a quiet puff on my cigarettes, which is what he preferred. Of course, you might come across a ridiculously priced brand and you might just buy it, but these are extreme exceptions. In the 1990s, when Mercedes-Benz launched the E-Class, I was involved in research. We had to work out what prices the new models would be. And the assumption was which of the models they need to price competitive with which BMW model. We did research, and what came out of the research is, in fact, people do not say, this is what I can afford, and then choose between a BMW and a Mercedes-Benz. People say, I am a Mercedes-Benz man, which model can I buy? Or afford. Now, Mercedes-Benz drivers don't like BMWs. It's as simple as that. I'm going to show you one neuro-marketing example. One of the great marketing case studies of how things went wrong is the Pepsi challenge. In the 1960s, Pepsi ran a campaign which was basically a blind test. People were asked to taste Pepsi, Coke. Before that they were asked, which brand do you prefer? They said, I prefer Coke. They then ran a blind taste test and people preferred brand B, which then turned out to be Pepsi. What made it more interesting was that Coke panicked when they saw the results and they came out with a new brand called Coke New. And that was a total disaster. They had to revert to the old brand. Now, Reed Montague decided to repeat this, but do it inside a fMRI machine. In other words, in a brain scanner. And it was an incredibly complex study, basically giving people Coke, asking them their preferences, giving them Pepsi, all before they went into the machine. When they then went into the machine, gave them blind sips of Pepsi and blind tastes of Coca-Cola, and they had to say which one they preferred. Then he mixed them around, told them here's some Coke, and told them here's some Pepsi. He had a very interesting result, because when people believed they were drinking Coke, certain areas in their brain lit up. When they believed they drank Pepsi, those areas did not light up. Here is part of his findings. Well, what he concluded was that there are two separate brain systems that contributes to their decision to which brand they would prefer, or which taste they would prefer. And the one played a prominent role and worked in sensory stimuli. In other words, it said this is, and gave an evaluation of the taste. The other one worked on what he called cultural influences. We would call it brand positioning, we would call it advertising, and those areas lit up when they thought they were drinking Coca-Cola. In other words, there are two things that we worry about. The one is, what does it taste like? But the second thing is, what do I know about that? What emotions arise when I'm tasting that? Now, there are two areas in the brain that are important for our decision making. The one is the nucleus accumbens, plays a role in the reward circuits, and it really works with the neurotransmitter dopamine, which promotes desire, and also serotonin, which effect includes satiation and inhibition. But dopamine is the big one. Dopamine is what causes drug addiction, and in fact also causes brand addiction. It just makes you feel good. Then there is another one area, it's the amygdala. The amygdala has really become a lot more important in the 1990s when it was discovered that that is your fear area, your avoid behavior. So the nucleus accumbens is the towards behavior, and the amygdala is the avoid behavior. This quote that I got is that maybe the amygdala controls a very general mechanism for inhibiting risky behavior when the outcomes are potentially negative. So, if you don't like Pepsi, therefore, buying it will have possibly a negative outcome, the amygdala will warn you. Now, you might ask, why didn't he come up with pictures with Pepsi where the amygdala or the avoid behavior lights up? I have to explain to you that when the computer or the fMRI machine takes these pictures, your whole brain is working, is firing all over the place. So it's a massive job to isolate those little yellow dots that he has in his pictures there. You literally have to come up with a hypothesis that says, I think that area might fire when they do this, and then you track that specific area. You do not track the whole brain because, well, it's just a lot of things firing that you're not going to make out what's going on. Now, in this case, there was no reason for him to look for avoidance behavior. So he was not looking at the hippocampus. But I'm convinced that the hippocampus, I am very sorry, that the amygdala would have been firing when they were feeding Pepsi to the Coca-Cola drinkers. So to demonstrate what happens with this series on demand curves and demand curve strategies, I, number one, wrote a program to analyze these things, and I also asked Mike Broom from Panel Service Africa to provide me with a sample. It was an online sample, because it's fast. I don't have to wait a month for the result, and of course it is cheaper. And I asked the four most important questions to my mind for any research project. How many carry packs of beer do you buy in a month? You need some kind of volumetric. Which of these brands do you usually buy? I wanted to demonstrate what happens to the question of usually buy, which I've done in the first video in this series. Then, which of these brands are you unlikely to buy? In other words, brand avoidance, aversion. I did a price trade-off, and I did ask for which of these brands have you recently seen advertising. That was sort of let's ask it while we're there. But the four important questions are the first four. This is the result of our little sample, a little survey. And what you will see is the brands that most people said are the usual brands is Heineken and Castle Light. Of course, all the other brands had a bit of a presence in the market or in the sample. But then when we asked not buy, you will see there are two brands that stand out. 40%, nearly half of the sample said they're not going to buy a Carling Black Label, and half said they're not going to buy Lion Lager. So you had two brands, maybe you can add Hansa Pilsner as a third brand, that had very high levels of aversion, brand aversion. So when you now come down to brand strategies and you start working with demand curves, it is very important that you realize there is a ceiling. There is a percentage that will not buy. You're going to have a very, very hard time to convince them to buy your brand, especially if you are following the Trout and Rees marketing warfare example, where you decide which brands you are going to attack. And of course, if you were calling Black Label, you must realize that the available market actually becomes less because there are people that are just averse to your brand. Well, I mentioned that preference was for Heineken, Castle Light. I mentioned that two brands, nearly half the sample say they will not buy. I don't want to create the impression that brand aversion is a bad thing. It is, in fact, a very good thing because it is due to the brands being well positioned. Mercedes-Benz is well positioned in people's minds, and BMW is well positioned in people's minds. That makes it strong in certain segments of the market. And those segments that prefer the one brand are not going to like the other brand, and the whole decision-making process is determined by that. I started off, when I told you about this experiment, that I asked the four most important questions you can, which is the usual brand, and of course brand aversion. And you saw the results for that in the previous chart, where I showed you usual brand as a blue bar and brand aversion as a red bar, and the rest being a potentially available market for you or your brand. Now, this is about as far as we can get with the data that you usually get before we start using the demand curve analyses. I'm going to show you in the next video, when we get into demand curves, how much further you can get with your study.